So, hi. Today I'm here with my friend Kurt Nelson, who has his own podcast called Behavioral Grooves. That is a great podcast to listen to if you would like to learn more about behavioral economics. And we're going to talk today about some solutions for gun violence. And he's had the opportunity on his show to interview a very innovative author, but I'm going to let you do a better job than I just did of introducing yourself and take it away.
Well, Terry, thanks for having me. Appreciate being here. So we have a podcast called Behavioral Grooves. We interview behavioral scientists talking about why people do what they do. So basically, behavioral economics is a kind of subset of behavioral science, which is the study of human behavior and thinking in various different pieces of that. And so it takes aspects from economics, from psychology, sociology, neuroscience, all sorts of different fields, and kind of pulls it together, kind of looking at it in a very large picture of what is driving our behaviors, what's driving how we think, and all of those aspects of it. And so we get to talk with some of the brightest minds in the world around that, and had the pleasure of talking with Jens Ludwig about his recent book, Unforgiving Places, The Unexpected Origins of Americans' Gun Violence. And so really interesting conversation.
And one of the aspects of behavioral science that, people may not be aware of is this idea that people don't always make rational choices, right?
It's one of the... So behavioral economics came out of that very piece, because economics, classical economics, is very much rooted in this idea that we are rational actors, that we maximize our utility, that we get as much information as we can and weigh all the pros and cons when we're making decisions, and our actions are determined in that way. What behavioral economics and behavioral science and psychology and just general living a life in this world, we realize, we are not that rational actor, that we are not always behaving in rational ways. Now, if I do a spreadsheet of like which car to buy and looking at all those, that's pretty rational. But, the vast majority of some of our actions are not done with a prefrontal cortex of our brain being activated, where we're making all these trade-offs. We use simple heuristics, simple rules of thumb that we've learned, and that work really well in most situations.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, so think about the way that you drive to work, right? If you're driving to work and you do that every single day, are you actually thinking about the route that you're taking, or are you on autopilot? Are you on a habitual component?
Right.
Or if you're going to a restaurant, another kind of heuristic is, all right, you go to McDonald's, you have an idea of what you're already going to order before you go in, because you're in a fast food restaurant and you typically order burgers there. If you go into a fancy 5-star restaurant, you're going to act and behave in a different way, right? And you're going to do that because there are social norms that are associated with it, and we have those heuristics that we understand of how we behave in those situations.
And so what part of that is want to make, how does Jens Ludwig in his book, Unforgiving Places, how does that fit into behavioral science? Why would he come on your show?
Yeah, so his premise, his hypothesis, and his research that looks at this is basically this idea that much of the gun violence that we have in the United States is not because the people that are acting it out are bad actors or they're evil, or that they're doing it for an economic, where it's gang violence and I'm getting this corner for my drug, business. That's not what most of the gun violence and gun deaths in the United States. And there's good research that he points out that shows that. His hypothesis is that there are situational and environmental factors that are driving this. And he goes and he talks a lot about what we call System 1 versus System 2 thinking. It was developed, that concept was developed by Danny Kahneman, who was a Nobel laureate behavioral scientist, basically.
And that book was...
Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Danny Kahneman, along with Amos Tversky, did work back in the 70s and 80s and really were kind of the groundbreaking people, along with Richard Thaler, to develop behavioral economics and to bring some of this in. And this idea that you said, that we're not always rational in our thinking in various different pieces. Jens takes that and applies that lens to, gun violence. Mm-hmm. And basically what he's saying is, the vast majority of gun violence is caused because people are having their System 1 brain thinking. And System 1, let's do a little backup. System 1, as much as I love Danny Kahneman, Nobel laureate, the labeling that he did for this two types of thinkings is horrible. So System 1 is really basically just automatic thinking. It's the stuff that happens instantaneous, often not even at a conscious level. It is the response that we have when we hear a car horn and we're crossing the street. We don't sit there and go, what car horn? What does that mean? Should I go fast? No, we respond immediately.
And there's a developmental thing there, right? Because if you had to think all the time about how should I react to that horn, you would be dead because the car
we couldn't get out of bed every morning, right? And so that's System 1 or automatic thinking. System 2 thinking is our more deep thinking. It uses the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, and it's where we get into thinking about.
It does the crossword puzzle for you.
It does the crossword puzzles. Well, here's a way of thinking about it. What's 2 plus 2?
4.
Right.
Let's not keep going too far.
But that's a System 1. We know that it's pretty quick. It's responsive. I don't have to think it. I memorized those when I was in grade school. But if I asked you 17 times 212, right? You can figure it out. I mean, you don't even need to use a calculator. You could put that on paper and pen. You could figure that out. That's using your prefrontal. That's System 2 thinking. 2 plus 2 is your more System 1 thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
And to back up a little bit, we should, I guess, give some of Jens Ludwig's sort of credentials as to why because he's a professor from Chicago, right?
University of Chicago. He has studied this for about 30 years.
And he started a violent prevention center.
Yeah,
right?
He started a violent prevention center. He's done some really interesting interventions and research on this. Has done some really great work with Sendel Melanhandi. I just mispronounced his last name. Sorry, Sendel. Another University of Chicago researcher who has looked at these types of violent crimes and the underlying root causes of them, and then putting in place programs and running experiments to see how can we prevent this moving forward. And so that's a lot of what this is from.
And so his main data set is from Chicago, and I think he's done a lot of drive-alongs with the police in Chicago, and not that he hasn't looked at other parts of the country, but that's kind of the genesis for it.
He does a lot of his research so University of Chicago, if people don't know, is on the south side of Chicago. It's in a community called Hyde Park, which is kind of this little island of professors and college students and different people who live in Hyde Park. But it's surrounded by basically some of the poorest and most violent areas in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, and by violent, I think they had 54 shootings over the Labor Day weekend or something crazy like that.
Yeah, and again, that's down from where it was, 10 years ago, but it is still way too high. Yeah.
So, clearly this is one of the reasons that I invited you in today, because I think he's got some great ideas, and you had the opportunity to interview him, which is terrific. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of his ideas. I know an underlying assumption is that we're not getting rid of guns. He's like, there's 400 million. They're not going anywhere. What are some of the other avenues to take to reduce violence?
Yeah, and he has a equation in there, emotion plus guns equals violence. And so you can look at that and say, yeah, we can reduce the gun side of it. He's just being more realistic and going,
right.
That's an uphill battle to fight, right? So there's two parts to that equation, and the other side is this emotion side. And so that's what he says is an easier fix, at least in the United States, in order to reduce the likelihood of gun violence and hopefully save some lives.
And one of the reasons he believes this is possible is he looks at different countries, like he compares our gun ownership to, say, Sweden. And you mentioned he looks at different neighborhoods with the same amount of guns, and things are different. So it's not just about the guns. It's kind of one of his premises. One
of the main components of the book and his research is looking at two different neighborhoods just south of Hyde Park in Chicago. They're called Greater Grand Crossing and South Shore. And so if you look at them from a socioeconomic perspective, they're both very, very poor, predominantly Black, Latino. They have about the same amount of gun ownership in both of them. And they're right next to each other. I mean, they are literally, there's a street, like if it was Minneapolis, it's like, it's like Phillips and Whittier, being separated by Franklin, right? That's the difference that these have. And yet what they find is that in Grand Crossing, it is not quite 2 times the number of homicides by gun violence that happen there. And so obviously there's something going on. What is it about Greater Grand Crossing versus South Shore that does that? And that's a lot of his research is looking at that and kind of trying to understand some of those different factors.
So you mentioned earlier, and I just want to reiterate it, like part of what I find so interesting about his theories is that he talks about how when people think about violence, they break down into 2 groups, basically. One is feeling that there's some people that just have moral failings, they're evil, you just have to, have higher repercussions to deal with them, right?
They're evil people out there, and they are the ones who shoot people and kill people, and they don't have remorse, and so you either have to lock them away for life or make the punishment so great that they're not going to do it because they're too afraid of the punishment.
And the other category of people, which I fall into for sure, is feeling like most crimes are the result of some sort of economic desperation or your back's to the wall, right? But what is interesting, I think, about him and his theories is that he's saying it's not really about those 2 things. It's more about how your brain operates.
Yeah.
And in given situations. I mean, there's a lot more to it. I'm oversimplifying, but I like the idea that he's trying to go beyond the 2 recognizable categories.
The 2 kind of political,
right.
talking points. If we just were able to increase, people's income and provide, a higher standard of living, there would be less violence in these areas. And now there's some truth to that, right?
I believe there.
He's not saying there isn't, and he's also not saying that there's not evil people out there that,
right.
You could do whatever you want, and they're still going to be evil, and they're there. But the vast majority of these gun violent components that he's talking about, and frankly, I looked at the research and I kind of buy into it. I think there's some aspects that are different there, are from these emotional encounters where people don't have either the environmental or situational factors that are going to help them calm down and defuse the situation, or they don't have the mental elements to be able to do that. And so you asked earlier, like some of his premise. So one of the things that he talks about is that part of the difference between, the two communities that I talked about in Chicago is this thing he calls eyes on the street, which are basically, people who are out there. It's storefronts, it's people walking on the street, it's people being out on their front porches, it's different things that are going to be these eyes on the street of watching and maybe being able to interact in a situation that is getting highly tense and emotional. And the more that you have those, the less likely that you're going to have gun violence. You will get, and he uses his own, an example from his own life where, he was walking his dog, another dog got free and attacked his dog, and he just started screaming and yelling, and they went back and forth with these. Basically, it was two college professors that he's doing, and he said, we could have come to fisticuffs, and granted, neither of them had a gun, but it was only because there was a security guard that kind of was cruising by and asked what's going on, and they both kind of calmed down and defused the situation. And the premise is that, cities that are designed to have those types of eyes on the street, those neighborhoods have less crime and so less violent crime. So
that would be like, one, businesses that are there, right?
Businesses,
so the people
small businesses that are there, and you have people, your business owner who's kind of invested in
out sweeping the sidewalk. Lighting, very much so. There's some really interesting study just from an environmental piece, and this goes back. So we're jumping all around here, but there was a theory called the broken window theory. Philip Zimbardo was from the Stanford prison experiment. Okay, was basically the person who put this together, and basically what he did is he did two things. He put this old kind of abandoned car, and he put one in like a fancy place near Stanford, and he put one in a more decrepitated kind of slum area in Oakland or something like that. Don't quote me on where he put those. And as people thought, the car in Oakland got, the tires taken off and windows crashed and different things pretty quickly. The one in Palo Alto or wherever it was didn't, until they broke a window. And then as soon as that window in that car was broken, it was like this sign to say, hey, come on in and do this. And there's been lots of other research around that. Now, broken window got a lot of publicity because New York kind of took this and they started policing actions about broken windows. So they would, minor infractions, and you would go and you would arrest people in different things. He's not saying that. He said that was the wrong response. But he's saying that the broken windows theory is not wrong. It is this idea that if you have a rundown building, it's more likely to have more crime and to instill a there's a theory in it's not even a theory. It lets people know no one's watching, right? They can get away with it. Once one person squats in a building, and what's 2 or 3 or 4 more, and there is kind of a roller coaster effect. It seems like to most crime, right? Like white collar crime too. It's like if you get away with.
There's an aspect in in psychology, it's called priming, and priming again has some kind of components that people are pushing back. There's some replication crisis on some of the studies, but priming has been proven, right? If I said, if you were gonna, let's talk about cleaning our hands and doing different things and getting ready for dinner, and then I said, all right, fill in the 2 words. It's a 4-letter word. It starts with S and ends in P. What's the word? What do you think?
Soap.
Yeah.
Right.
So I just primed you to think soap. I could have done another thing about like driving a car and making sure different things, and the same S starts and ends in P, and you probably would have said stop, right? We can prime our brain to be thinking in certain ways. there's good research that shows that those types of environments that are, look at it's broken down, broken glass, weeds overgrowing on a corner lot, boarded up windows, graffiti, all of those things prime our brain in a way that is more likely to have violence and or continue kind of down that road.
So to kind of focus this conversation on Minneapolis, it seems like, just doing things like cleaning up vacant lots, better lighting, having people out on the streets. These are all things that are relatively low cost that could help reduce violence, right? Yeah,
I think there's a lot of really good components around that, right? Cleaning up graffiti, as you said, vacant lots. There was research in Philadelphia where they took vacant lots and they made them into corner pocket parks.
Yeah.
And that reduced crime.
It's a great idea.
So you can take that and you can say, so it's not necessarily you're policing things, but you're fixing the broken windows. Mm-hmm. You are making it feel like this is not a place where I want to do, or you're not priming our brains in order to do that. Same thing as you said, getting people out on the streets, having businesses, small businesses, multitudes of those that are up and running, and you're getting people coming in and out of the store, you're doing all of that. That all helps in reducing crime, and particularly, violent crime.
So talking about kind of how our brains work again, and I was thinking about the example we were talking about, when you hear the horn and you're trying to cross the road, you don't have to think about it. But that's kind of now, right? But you learn that as a kid, right? Yes. Someone teaches you to be aware of that, right? Yeah. So his philosophy, I guess, or theory, is that some of the social emotional skills, or how you stop the violent behaviors, there is some training that can be done.
Yeah.
So what's some of those type things that he feels?
So there's a really interesting aspect that he points out. He goes that the more schooling that a person has, the less likely they are to commit a violent crime. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that you have this greater, you're not taught this, right? But his hypothesis, and there's some really good components around this, is that it teaches us how to think. So more schooling teaches us how to think. And we don't even actually have schooling around that. So it's called metacognition, right? So I'm thinking about my thinking. So I understand, if I know that in these types of situations, when I'm stressed and very, it's hot and humid out, I might not make the best choices. If I understand that, then my brain works in a different way, and I'm better off to be able to respond appropriately.
I would suggest that schooling teaches us more how to use that long-term thinking, right? I don't know if regular, sit down in the class and that kind of thing is teaching us how to deal with those stressful short interactions, right?
I think you're right. I think that, and this is part of what he's saying, is that if we can change curriculum in schools, adding different things, in understanding some of those components, right? It's like, again, I'm a big believer that you should have a statistics course in high school, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, statistics is not taught. It's one of the biggest things that people don't understand, and it has vast consequences for how we look at different aspects of it.
Right.
Same thing can be said about teaching some of those soft skills and metacognition, and even such a thing like playing chess and being able to rationalize and think moves ahead, and the idea that, this move now will actually impact me differently longer. And they've shown that those types of interventions and different things can change people and give them the time. And one of the things that he talks about in the book, and he mentioned in our interview, is that they obviously in Chicago, and with the work they do, they're in Cook County Juvenile Delinquency Center an awful lot, right? And so he's got to know some of the officers in there and different pieces. And one person said this many years ago, and it stuck with him. He said, if I could take 10 minutes away from 80% of the people that are in here, they wouldn't be in here.
Right.
That 10 minutes was all it took for them to make a really dumb decision in their lives. And I think what we're talking about here is not necessarily being able to take those 10 minutes away, but changing our brain so that our brain gives us that 10 minutes
right.
and slows us down enough so that we can get out of that situation easily.
And that's sort of the heart of the behavioral science part of his theory, right? That we're put in these situations, and we're not using slow term thinking. We're not saying, I'm premeditated working this.
Yeah.
I'm premeditated going to commit this violence because someone did something bad to me. I mean, you read so often, it's more like someone gets in a dispute in a bar or in the street or someone, yep. and then you react, yep. right? And so it seems like he's looking at the data and seeing this is indeed how most violent crimes are happening. They're not premeditated, and that there are some actual trainings that can be implemented. And it seems like he's talking mainly about youth.
Yeah. Well, again, most violent crime is committed by youth. Most right. homicides, gun-violent homicides, are committed by, and I don't quote me on that, but it is people under 25, 30 years old.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And going back to the point that you had talked about earlier about, the two camps of bad actors and then the economic side of things. The one kind of issue that I have on the economic side of things comes down to just this, because there is an aspect of, if you have better economic standards, you typically have better schooling. Your schools, if you can raise the economic prosperity of a community, you're more likely to get better teachers, have better, mm-hmm. Stuff at schools. So you can start training that. It also comes into some of the aspects about culture. So you talked about the learn response that we have for a horn, right? You learn response on different things. In certain situations, in certain communities, right? If I don't respond in a, like if you make fun of me and I let it go and I just walk away, what happens is that I get made fun of more and more, and that actually gets harder to,
right.
And it might not be just making fun of. It's like if somebody pushes me, all right, well, next time it's going to be a knife. And so I need to push back hard to make sure that next time I don't get a knife. And so you're taught that. You're taught that the response to aggression is more aggression.
Right.
And that's a learned behavior. And so, again, it comes into understanding, can you put programs in place to dissuade that or to move away from that learned response?
Well, I guess my initial reaction to that is you can control what you do, right? But that doesn't mean that bully isn't, they've learned somehow that being a bully makes them successful. And so they keep doing it until somebody stops them. So I don't know.
But this comes into when you think about gun violence and homicides as opposed to this. Yeah, that bully will still be a bully. And that bully might be that part of that 20, 30% that we are, this isn't going to change.
Yeah.
But if you have a situation where you're able to walk away or to get out of that, diffuse that situation and get that 10 minutes of your life back, right? The bully will also diffuse, right? Typically. I'm not saying always. I can't make those kind of claims. And so you can have, it's the two sides egging each other on, escalating this up so that I go out and I grab the gun out of my glove compartment, or I take the gun out of my, backpack, and now we're in trouble. Yeah.
It's really escalated. And so his idea is that we need to, he does think that the violence prevention programs work. And he mentions this group, Becoming a Man, that uses certain counseling and behavioral techniques One of the examples that, and I should say, like you mentioned, the 10 minutes, all of this is designed to help someone essentially control that 10 minutes and make sure that they aren't committing an act in that 10 minutes where they've been hijacked. That, lower mind, if you will, has been hijacked. It's helping them gain control over that, right?
I think that's a really good way of putting it, yeah.
And one of the experiments that he talks about that I just found really fascinating was this idea that, and this is one of the trainings, is they would take two men and they would or youth, be in a room together, give one of them a ball, and then the instructions were for the person who didn't have the ball to get it from the other person. And they were saying that 80% of the time, the person without the ball would immediately get physical and try and overpower them, try and rip open their fingers, like all these things. And only 20% of the time did they ever ask the other person if they could have the ball, right?
And when they asked, the person almost always gave them the ball.
Right.
Right.
And so, those sort of experiments are fascinating, right? Because it highlights what your brain is doing, that there's certain training there that's telling you that to get what you want, the first step is to overpower the other person.
Yeah.
Right? In a physical way.
Yeah. And that comes down into, how we think and how we then respond. And again, some of those are learned responses. But even in situations like, you've never been in a situation where you've been in a room with somebody and you get the ball from that person, right? But you make
not like a actual controlled experiment.
Maybe the basketball game, whatever, right? You have that. But those are where you look at the situation and the way that we think impacts how we behave. And so that's where the behavioral science of this all comes in, right? So, yeah.
I do wonder, a lot of times when he talks about these groups, the violence intervention, how do we get people into them, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned training in school, right? And it seems like they're constantly chipping away at programs, whether it's SHOP or, to get them to add on an emotional regulation.
Yeah.
It's so needed, but it seems like because it's not tested or whatever, it's not in the curriculum. So I don't know, does he talk about any ways that we actually get these programs out into the broader public?
Yeah, I think it's really, I don't know. I can't say. I think it's one of the hardest parts of this, right? But you could think, all right, so if you can't do it in a school, in the regular class, can you do it in an after-school program? And can you even do things that are more fun, but you're bringing this component in, right? So you could think about a nonprofit having it. You could do it at a YMCA or some sort of programming where you can build this into a sport component or some kind of game, different elements. And so there are ways that you can build this to be teaching people some of these emotional regulation components, and yet, have it fun so people want to participate. That's part of this. You can mandate it as part of, the curriculum that comes in, either in a district or statewide. You could probably, have it as part of, if somebody does get arrested, right? That could be part of their treatment as opposed to just being put to jail or doing some community work, right? You could have an instituted, you have to be part of this program to learn some of these things. And I think one of the pieces that is really interesting, and this happens to all of us, right, is that under stress, we respond differently than when we don't have stress, right? When we...
Oh, absolutely.
So understanding and being able to know and to have tips and hints and methods to be able to make sure that you're responding in a way that is going to have a better long-term outcome for you. And I think it's just, regardless of whether it's homicide or if it's just a stressful situation where you're dealing with a teacher you're pissed off at or different things. If you can have better regulatory, kind of emotional regulatory skill sets, then your life is going to be demonstratively better.
And in some ways, it's, to me, it reminds me of like meditation to a certain extent. I know they've tried this in some schools, and it's been, you mentioned chess. They've tried different programs, and, it is, at least you have to have a certain amount of motivation to understand your own thinking or to be aware of your own thinking. And, they do... he does address to a certain extent like this idea like, well, some of these programs have been around since the 70s, right? Like violence prevention programs and stuff like that. And then the question becomes like, well, if we've known about this for 50 years, why isn't it more prevalent? Why aren't people demanding that this gets incorporated into schools and probation or whatever it is, so that we're spreading the word, if you will.
I think, and this is just me thinking this, it's the social discourse of this is the way my side of the political spectrum. We need to build more jails and get more police officers and arrest everybody and put them away so they can't do anything. Yeah. Versus we need to focus in on the economic side of things and make sure that they're there. And so you have those two divides, and you just work on those. And that's where their focus and the money and kind of that goes. And so it's gotten overlooked. These types of interventions don't feel... it's not, I'm not locking somebody up. I'm not, doing some of these other facets.
They don't fit into the mold of some of the other solutions that are out there. And that's why I'm glad that we're talking about it. I feel like it's so important to like increase your set of tools.
Yes.
Right. And because he does talk about the importance of police presence and like as having a preventative effect. Like, are they in the communities before a crime happens, letting people know that they're there, they're available?
Well, and even how police interact, right? That was another piece of this, and I don't know, but this idea of we're in these situations, and as humans we learn, right? And what do we learn when a police arrests somebody or tackles somebody versus, hey, you kind of messed up here? You think about the epitome of what, the Andy Griffin show or something like, that neighborhood cop where, Billy got caught shoplifting, and did they arrest him and throw the key away? No, they kind of brought him back. They had, brought him to the parents. They returned the candy or whatever it is that they stole. And you learn from that, right? Those are good learnings about how that I shouldn't do this, and here's this. But I'm not being, then put away, and the lessons that I learned from that are very different, right? So, police presence, people, eyes on the streets, all of those things.
Even like you're, going back to the broken window experiment, that if there's police out there walking around, that first break of the window is less likely to happen.
Exactly.
Right?
Less likely to happen. Right? But even, I know Minneapolis, we have a number of the, non-police that are out there, violence interrupters. And having them out there is a good thing. Now, we don't want them all just congregated in one kind of area. They need to be out and spread out and talking with people and having those interactions. And those are the types of eyes on the street that really work.
Well, and just getting back to like presence in the neighborhood, it's like, knowing like, oh, this kid is out late every single night and seems to be causing trouble. Like, maybe I need to talk to this person, and kind of just being able to recognize the actual dynamics of a given neighborhood seems very important to me.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's also the aspect of improving neighborhood environments like I talked about, like get rid of the graffiti, get rid of the, I do think there's, this better than me, but the recent abandoned buildings, kind of like you have to be actively trying to sell them or upgrade them as opposed to just letting them decay and go.
Well, that's such a tough one. I don't know all the laws, but I've heard so many stories of people who have a troubled home or property near them, and they can't get rid of it, right?
See,
Someone is selling drugs out of it, or...
This is where, again, if we can set up the rules and put the policies in place to make that easier and to hold, those landlords accountable who aren't upkeeping their properties or letting it decay or whatever it is. And if we can, those again are things that we can implement that will make a difference. Creating pocket parks out of abandoned lots.
Community gardens seem to fill that a little bit, right?
Community gardens are great. They're a wonderful piece of that, right? So you have that, can we put something in place for, improving metacognition and emotional regulation in programs, however that is, whether it's YMCA, if it's a in-school program, after-school program. You think about all of the great nonprofits around here, and they could really be utilizing some of these in order, because that not only helps in preventing violence like we talked about, but it just helps across the fold and a number of other things, right? And I think that we can do a whole bunch of stuff. Lots
of things that we could try. I guess it's, hopefully getting the ideas out to, some of the officials that could push these things a little bit more.
I'd be happy to talk to any of those, to bring in, again, behavioral science shows it's about how we behave and understanding that, the rational side of things isn't always the thing that is in control.
Yeah.
And if you understand that, and you go, the famous book called, Predictably Irrational. So it's not the fact that we're irrational. If it were just irrational and it was random scattered noise, then it's hard, right? But we're predictably irrational. We know that in these types of situations, the rational thing would be this, but we actually do, rational thing is X, but we actually do Y. It's not that we do D, E, Z, double A, whatever. We do Y. So if knowing that, then you can put, elements in place in order to change that.
So what is the appropriate response when someone cuts you off in traffic? What's that one?
So there's this aspect of where it's the I'm gonna draw a blank on the name, where basically, if we cut somebody off in traffic, it's because we have a good reason to, right? I'm late to pick up my child and they're scared, or whatever that would be. We rationalize that away.
So I have a perfect example of that, right? Like, so that when you're going north on 35W and you got to get on to 94 West, and there's this huge backup of cars, and I know so many people get angry if you come up by the side and cut in.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you do it in a controlled way. People just feel like you're, I don't know. This seems like I see these jokes about Minnesotans, like whatever the longest line is, that's the one they're going to pick to stand in. I don't know if that's true or not, but you see it in that getting on to 94, how angry people get. I don't know if it's totally rational.
Well, but I think there's an aspect of it where then if somebody else does that, right, we don't think that, maybe they're going to the hospital, maybe they're doing something else. Yeah. That it is this idea, they're just assholes, right? They are just a jerk. And they're doing it to piss me. They're doing it specifically against me. And then you get that emotional response. And there is...
Is there an easy way that you're aware of, recognizing when you've gone on tilt at all?
This idea of going on tilt, which again Jens talks about. if you think about, like, if you were to have a camera,
or a wife.
Or a wife, but mostly a camera. So the wife can be emotional, right? But if you can think about, like, having a camera that's just watching you and seeing the whatever it is, and if you were to be an observer and just watching what took place, right? And we've used this in corporate trainings that I do, is like, you ask people, all right, you're walking down the hallway and you're new to the company and you walk past the president. And you go, hi, and the president is just busy and doesn't say anything and walks past. What's the immediate response that most people have? Oh, what did I do wrong? The president hates me. They're running through all these things. But if you actually just, looked at a videotape of that, it's two people walking by, somebody mentioned, and the other person didn't respond. And you could think of 100 other reasons, like they just got some really bad news, they were lost in thought, their hearing aid was turned off, right? I mean, 100 of different things. Same thing in traffic, or when you feel that emotional response that's coming up, just take that step back, try to do it. I mean, we talk about some stress regulation pieces, and I always use this as 2 breaths, 7 breaths, which is an old, my understanding is an old Japanese kind of proverb that don't make any decision before you take 2 breaths, but make sure you make that decision before 7 breaths. And so it's this idea of slowing down to make sure you're thinking about things, and 2 breaths is actually a long time for our brain to process things.
Yeah.
And then the 7 breaths is just to make sure that we don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Like, all right, what am I going to eat at this restaurant? Am I getting the chicken or the steak? Well, okay, give it 7 breaths and then make your choice. And most likely you'll be absolutely fine.
So why don't you tell us again what the book is, and, maybe your quick summary of it, and, why you would recommend it, or if you would, to others.
I mean, it's an interesting book. It's a great story. It's Jens Ludwig, Unforgiving Places, The Unexpected Origins of American Gun Violence, and I think it's a really good book from the perspective of, hey, it talks about gun violence from a different perspective. This is, we talked about already, a number of different things. Environmental situational factors, the way that our brains process information, and looking at real solutions that we can do that can bring gun violence down. Is it going to be a total, elimination of all gun violence? No, right? That's not going to happen. But we can reduce it. If we can reduce it by 10%, 20%, 30%, then that's the thing to do. Now, he is a professor. He writes like a professor. Even though it's not a textbook per se, but he does have really good stories in there, and he brings in some really good research. So.
And so in your podcast, Behavioral Grooves, you get an opportunity to interview a lot of people, a lot of interesting thinkers. So how, if people wanted to hear your podcast, how do they find that?
You just Google Behavioral Grooves. It'll come up. It's on Apple, Spotify. It's on every type of pod service. We're on YouTube. So feel free to just do that. And as we talked about, we get to talk to people like Jens. We get to talk to people about business and corporate kind of components. We get to talk to people about conspiracy theories and different reels around that. We talk to people about polarization in our political climate, and various different things. So it's a wide variety of experts that we try to have fun with and bring some interesting perspectives, and hopefully you leave after listening a little bit smarter.
And how many of these conversations have you had?
We have over 500.
500?
We just crossed the 500 mark. We've been doing it for 8 years. It is a weekly podcast. We try to actually get about 5 to 6 episodes out a month. So we usually have a shorter something in between, various different pieces. We've won a couple different awards, and so we're excited. We're having a big celebration.
Yeah, are you doing anything to celebrate this mark?
October 16th, we are having a live event at Malcolm Yards. You can go out, and again, if you search Behavioral Grooves, There's lots of information if you wanted to come and see what it's really like. We're actually having a different professor from the University of Chicago come up and speak. Nicholas Epley, who does his research, is on talking to strangers and how
so that could be a whole nother class for school, right? I mean, like, because it seems like talking to strangers, there's a certain amount of emotional control that's maybe needed, right? So maybe put that in the same class.
Yeah, there you go. But it's an interesting fact, and did some really fun research on, the fact that most people don't like to talk to strangers and won't if they're like riding a bus or a train, and yet they predict that they will feel worse for it, but if they actually do it, they realize, oh, actually my day is better.
Yeah.
So,
well, great. Well, thank you for coming on. I think it's a really interesting read, and I think you did a great job of relaying what some of his theories and ideas are.
Well, so I appreciate it, and thank you for inviting me, and love all the stuff, as you know, been a big supporter since the beginning.
Great. Thank you.